Let's just get right into it, because today's explainer, it's not your standard athletic competition, not even close. We are examining a deeply unsettling psychological thriller, and it played out in real time inside a steel cage. We're breaking down the infamous, honestly hard-to-watch clash between Hangman Adam Page and Swerve Strickland at AEW All Out 2024. Now, to really grasp this, you kind of need to understand who these men actually are, right? Hangman Page used to be the anxious, righteous cowboy, like literally the moral compass of the locker room. And Swerve Strickland? He was the ruthless, incredibly ambitious rising star who'd cross any line to get to the top. As someone who's observed combat sports for a long time, I can tell you right now, what happened when these two finally collided went so far beyond the boundaries of professional wrestling. It was a terrifying case study in human endurance, vengeance, and honestly, the complete collapse of a moral compass. Okay, let's dive into this. You see that quote from the commentary team? That wasn't just hyperbole to sell tickets. It was a genuine warning. From the very second these athletes walked to the ring, flanked by this massive, heavy security detail, you could just feel it. And look, security wasn't there for pageantry. They were strictly sequestered to protect the staff, the timekeepers, and the production crew from literally getting caught in the crossfire. Imagine the palpable tension in that arena. The normal, excited roar of a wrestling crowd was totally gone, replaced by this anxious, super uncomfortable buzz. A 2.5-ton steel cage is slowly lowering, trapping two men who harbored genuine, deep-seated hatred for one another. Even the broadcasters themselves noted they were tense, nervous, and legitimately worried about the claustrophobia of that structure and what these guys were actually capable of doing to each other. So that brings us to the core question of our explainer. What exactly happens when a rivalry totally strips away the veneer of sportsmanship and just evolves into a fight for sheer survival? We really have to shift our focus completely away from standard entertainment here and look at the terrifying human element at play. I mean, in a standard title bout, your goal is a 3-second pinfall, right? Or a submission. It's about athletic supremacy. But when hatred runs this incredibly deep, the objective fundamentally shifts. The goal is no longer to win a match or secure a championship belt. No, the objective becomes permanent, irreversible destruction. You aren't trying to pin your opponent anymore. You are literally trying to ensure they do not walk out of that cage under their own power. To really understand the clinical reality of this destruction, we have to look at the environment itself. This was a lights-out match. By definition, we're talking about an unsanctioned bout that operates entirely outside the safety and regulatory standards of the wrestling industry. Let me put my fight doctor hat on for just a second to explain what this means medically. Once that bell rings, the referee, they're completely powerless. There are no rope breaks, no countouts, and most importantly, there are absolutely no concussion protocols or medical stoppages for arterial bleeding. The ref is strictly there to observe a total knockout or a verbal submission. That's it. It is, for all intents and purposes, a legally sanctioned street fight. These athletes are willingly subjecting themselves to unregulated, catastrophic physical trauma with zero institutional protection to save them from themselves.
Section 1. The Roots of Hatred.
Before we start analyzing the physical breakdown of the match itself, we absolutely must establish the emotional stakes, because, let's be real, violence of this magnitude doesn't just happen out of nowhere, it is meticulously cultivated. Just look at this timeline of escalating retaliation. It all started back in October 2023 when Swerve Strickland crossed the ultimate line. He actually invaded Hangman Page's home, creeping right up to the crib where Hangman's baby slept. I mean, that is a profound violation of safety. From there, the psychological warfare just escalated to an unthinkable degree, peaking just days before this match. Hangman retaliated by committing outright arson. He burned down Swerve's childhood home, the exact sanctuary Swerve had recently bought for his own family to secure their legacy. By the time they finally stepped into that cage at All Out 2024, the personal animosity had driven both men entirely past the point of no return.
Hangman's psychological state going into this is, well, it's both fascinating and deeply disturbing. See, he genuinely believed he had walked the righteous path. In his mind, he was just defending his home and his family. Yet week after week, he had to return to arenas where fans were universally cheering Swerve Strickland, the very man who had terrorized his pregnant wife. Hangman's inability to accept the audience condoning those actions, it completely shattered his psyche. And you know, there is nothing more dangerous than a man who believes his atrocities are morally justified. It provided Hangman with the twisted justification he needed to descend into absolute madness. He was convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that his violent, unhinged retribution was a holy crusade, and the only path to true justice.
Section 2. From Tactics to Total Chaos.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it frames the rapid deterioration of the bout. Looking at this from an analytical perspective, we see a stark, honestly terrifying contrast.
Over on the left, we've got tactical maneuvers. Early on, there was actually a semblance of fight IQ, right? Swerve tried to restrain Hangman as the cage lowered, trying to trap him outside. Later, Hangman targeted Swerve's open facial wounds with the bottom knuckle of his fist, which is a gritty, experienced Street Fighter tactic designed to quickly widen a laceration and impair vision. But then, look at the right side. That wrestling logic almost immediately dissolved into pure, vindictive torture. Just imagine the psychological break required to take a metal staple gun, press it against a man's pectoral muscle, and drive a steel staple through a photograph of his family directly into his flesh. At this point, this was no longer about gaining a physical advantage. It was entirely about inflicting maximum, humiliating, emotional, and physical agony. Let's break down the clinical reality of what was happening to their bodies at this exact moment. They were trapped inside a steel structure, repeatedly ramming each other into the unforgiving chain link and jagged barbed wire. As the deep lacerations opened up, the physiological toll of that severe blood loss was immediate. When you lose that volume of blood, your systolic blood pressure drops rapidly, so to compensate, your heart begins pumping frantically, which results in a massive adrenaline dump. But here's the thing, that adrenaline burns out quickly. Suddenly, severe hypoxia sets in. Oxygen becomes critically scarce in the bloodstream. Lactic acid just floods the muscle tissue, making your limbs feel like they're literally encased in lead. Both of these men were essentially suffocating on their own feet, struggling just to stay conscious while operating purely on raw survival instinct.
Section 3. The Arsenal of Vengeance.
So, as the oxygen depleted and the fatigue really set in, the danger exponentially increased. And this brilliantly illustrates how the introduction of weapons completely changed the geometry of the fight. Listen, these weren't standard wrestling weapons like kendo sticks or folding tables. They were highly personalized instruments of psychological trauma. A staple gun used to bind a man to the image of his loved ones. Thick chains of barbed wire laced around arms to literally shred muscle tissue. A heavy concrete cinder block that instantly turns a Candice wrestling ring into a brutal, unforgiving construction site, where a single drop can shatter a skull or cave in a ribcage. But I have to say, the most horrifying weapon of all was sourced directly from their shared traumatic history. Take the burnt wood, for example. Right in the middle of his total carnage, Swerve Strickland reached into a heavy canvas bag, and the realization of what he pulled out, it sent an absolute chill through the arena. It was a charred, splintered piece of wood from the very childhood home that Hangman had just burned to the ground. In an act of pure, heartbroken desperation and honestly poetic cruelty, Swerve weaponized the charred remnants of his own destroyed sanctuary. He took that jagged spike and drove it directly into his rival's skull. It was an agonizing, harrowing narrative moment. The sheer emotional trauma of arson and lost memories literally manifested as a physical weapon meant to blind and disfigure.
Section 4. Costly tactical mistakes. Let's move to and see how this builds into a catastrophic turning point, looking at it like a veteran breaking down game tape. In an environment fueled by this much unhinged emotion, even elite competitors make really critical errors. Swerve, running on blind hatred rather than fight IQ, wedges a steel chair into the corner. He then throws his entire body weight into a high-risk leaping attack. But ask yourself, why did he rush? It's simple. His rage completely overrode his strategy. Hangman brilliantly recognizes this overcommitment. Using the physics of Swerve's own momentum against him, Hangman catches him mid-air and counters with a devastating awesome bomb, driving Swerve forcefully backward directly onto the jagged steel edge of that wedged chair. Swerve's raw desperation completely backfired, shifting the control of the entire match in a split second.
As a fight doctor, I really have to emphasize the grim physiological reality of the trauma the spine and the nervous system endure during an impact exactly like that. When a human spine, specifically the super vulnerable L4 and L5 lumbar vertebrae, is slammed across the hard, unyielding top lip of a steel chair, or, later across a concrete cinder block, the body's alarm system just goes absolutely haywire. You experience an immediate nerve shutdown. The violent compression of the sciatic nerve results in bilateral radiculopathy. That's a sudden, intense numbness and temporary loss of leg function. These guys were quite literally breaking each other's backs out there. The only reason either man was able to stand back up is because the overwhelming cocktail of adrenaline and pure survival instinct temporarily masked injuries that will, without a doubt, plague them for decades to come.
Section 5. A dangerous escalation. Despite the shattered spines, the critical hypoxia, and the immense blood loss, neither man would quit. Their pride simply wouldn't allow it. And that obstinate refusal led to an unprecedented level of danger. It led to a climax that deeply, deeply unsettled everyone watching. It took exactly just one hypodermic needle, pulled from a bag, uncapped, and driven directly, viciously through the inside of a man's cheek. In the long, violently documented history of this industry, this was a line rarely, if ever, crossed.
It was a visual so sickening and viscerally disturbing that it mercifully forced the referee to wave his arms and call a knockout. That one single act of absolute depravity finally ended the spectacle, leaving the massive arena and the veteran commentators in a stunned, disgusted silence.
Section 6. The unseen psychological toll.
So the crucial point is to zoom out and evaluate the macro-level damage of what we just witnessed. This match didn't just end with a ringing bell. It left an unseen, immensely heavy psychological toll on the athletes. Regardless of the official outcome, both of these men have permanently sacrificed a vital piece of their humanity. The broadcasters wisely noted that these competitors are going to have to wake up every single day for the rest of their lives and look in the mirror, living with the memory of the depravity they willingly inflicted on a peer. I mean, this is a profound form of PTSD. You don't just watch the blood off and walk away from an environment like that with your moral compass fully intact. The psychic scars run far, far deeper than the physical lacerations.
The record books will objectively show that Hangman Adam Page won by knockout. But, as our explainer clearly outlines, this was not a victory to be celebrated with confetti and cheers. It was a tragedy. Both men undeniably shortened their careers. The anxious, honorable Hangman Page who stepped into that arena years ago, he is completely dead and unrecognizable today. Furthermore, they have set a highly dangerous precedent for the rest of the locker room. They have forever changed and dangerously escalated the standard of violence in their industry. If stapling family photos to a chest and driving hypodermic needles through a human cheek is what it takes to settle a blood feud today, what on earth will it take tomorrow?
Which leaves us with this final thought. When a rivalry pushes athletes so far into the darkness that they willingly and permanently sacrifice their physical health and completely abandon their moral compass just to inflict pain, is winning even important anymore? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.